Alright, time for another DraftPhysics.com video presentation. Alright, so the Ian Gosling guy has made another video asserting a point that doesn't seem terribly relevant, but regardless. And he says in the video that he has to draw it and explain it, but he's, who knows when he'll get around to doing that. So understanding the dynamics of the lever. Where's my mouse? Oh, there it is. Anyway, the balance. So I guess I'll play that at the end of this video, but I thought it interesting that I just checked the Brozo video to see if anyone brings up the point that the fact that he has amplified the very effect he was complaining about that was skewing the results. And yes, somebody did. And so I figured I'll read some of these comments because they might be insightful into the Brozo mentality, where yes, there is actually a place where he says basically, I keep doing these experiments all these different ways, and the only ones I'm really trying to find are the ones that come out my way, and those are the only ones you're going to see. All the ones that don't come out the way I want them to, you won't see. So he's making it kind of clear that he's just trying to confirm. I mean, it's just a confirmation bias, and that's all he's interested in. He's not really interested in finding out how the thing works or revealing how it works. All right, anyway, Gary has a valid point about the two objects having different moments of inertia. So again, yes, I wouldn't call these moments of inertia. Wouldn't bother. You're just saying how much energy is being lost from the linear motion because you have to rotate the object. So you can understand it. The simplest way to understand it is I can roll something down a ramp, and if the ramp ends as a cliff, you can understand the object is still going to be spinning from its roll. And there's energy caught up in that spin. The spin isn't for free. The spin had to be created by the very energy, okay, the source, that was causing the linear motion. So some of the linear motion has been lost to the rotational motion. The rotation consumes a portion of the momentum. Portion of the momentum is in its spin. So if the saw blade is coming towards you and it's not spinning, there's no energy in the spin, then all the blade can do is hit you with its momentum and the direction. But if it's spinning, obviously it has energy in that spin based on its mass. The heavier it is, and the spin will rip you to pieces. And so there's a lot of energy in the spin portion of the energy conservation. All right, he wouldn't use those words. It is a problem. Yes, I wouldn't use those words. The half mass is a hollow cylinder, meaning it has a higher moment of inertia, meaning more of its mass has to move a higher velocity when it is rotating. So while it's rotating, more of its mass is doing this big circle thing. Doing the big circle thing takes more energy than to do little tiny circles. Little tiny circles don't take as much energy. You're not moving mass in two directions, as much. You're not bisecting the energy into two different motions. Okay, it has a higher moment of inertia relative to the mass than the whole mass. Yes, so the whole mass has a lot of stuff that's only moving very slowly towards the center, and obviously the hollow mass has a lot of mass moving very large distances at very high speeds. This is the same problem as in the previous similar experiment where half the mass was sawn off pool ball. So I guess I should illustrate this just for the hell of it, just to be clear. The people who are really paying any attention to this conversation shouldn't be people who are completely ignorant of physics arguments and all of that crap. But obviously if you had two different versions of the pool ball, you had this, you cut off its two sides here and here, and so you can sort of understand that this is more mass, but it's wider here. This width means there's more mass in this narrow area than there is mass in the high, far away from the center. So the further the mass is from the center, the more energy it's going to consume when you rotate it. So in a sense, he cut off the parts that had less moments of inertia and kept the parts that had the higher moment of inertia. So in a sense, it would have been a big cheat and advantage to advantage this way, okay, in the sense of creating a differential in how much energy was stored in the rotation. But the trick was this one didn't rotate, it purely skidded. Now, skidding isn't friction free. It's just indicating that the friction is low enough that there isn't enough contact between the surfaces to force the rotation. But it doesn't mean you're not losing some energy to the ground. And so in that case, this one had no visible rotation. This had some visible rotation, not rotation consistent with its motion in terms of rolling consistent. It was half skidding and half rotating. So there was a little bit of rotation in this object. So obviously any rotation versus no rotation means this one lost some energy. And I would say insignificant amounts, but it would skew the 11 to 19 results to something like 12 and 18 or something, getting closer. Again, we're talking about a 15% margin, which is not huge. The difference between me being right and them being right is only 15%. So that's the part where it gets a little dicey. You have to be really careful how you do these experiments. So there's a lot of things you could argue. Obviously, when the lever is moving twice the speed at this end, you have to be a little bit careful that you're not throwing the object sideways. So I would argue that the sideways motion that this was thrown was more than the sideways motion this one was thrown, and so that consumes some energy also. But anyway, so that's the simple argument. Obviously, if you take the mass and put all the mass here on the outside, and then you have another object, I did this yesterday, so I really shouldn't have to, and you have another object solid, you're going to be creating a problem, because this one's going to lose a lot more of its momentum linearly this way, rolling, okay? It's going to lose a lot more of it consumed in this rotation. So this one will have almost twice the amount of energy, energy being deposited in the mass to this higher average. So if you went and found the average speed of an atom in the rotational direction, not in the linear direction, but the rotational direction, okay, the average here would be almost probably close to twice the average. This average atom is moving twice as much in the rotational motion as the average atom from this one. So it's a substantial difference is the point. Alright, moving on. Okay, so then Mindless Marvels chimes in. Yeah, I found that strange as well. Why didn't you make a comment about it? See, that's part of what shows in all your duplicity here, is that you really don't challenge any of this stuff. Everything I have to point out, just about every single defect, I have to point them out. None of you do that job ever. Why was one of the cylinders hollow and not the other? Well, you should understand why. It's just he wanted to make two objects twice the mass. Now, what he could have done was just taken an object, a substance, and just cut it. And cut one piece an inch long and one piece 2 inches long. And that would have done the job of creating a half mass. But he didn't choose to do it that way. Now, that probably creates some other problems in terms of contact and different things that it might skew it a little bit, but it seems unlikely to me that it's going to be a major problem. But then if you're going to do the experiment, that's what you want to do, that if they roll, you want them to lose the same percentage of their energy to rolling. Now, the very fact that he tried on purpose to make them roll seems to me, ideally, you try to evade wherever you can any other variable that'll screw with your results. So it'd be nice to get rid of that problem. That's why I suggested pendulums, weights on a string, and then you could hit them and you don't have to worry about rolling. The energy has to only go into their motion in a direction rather than internal spin. All right. So Brozo's answer is, why is it strange? So he says that angular momentum was why his first experiment came out towards my, proving me right. And so he's used that as the excuse to even do this second experiment. And then he understands the concept so little that he actually makes it a lot worse, which is pretty funny. Afterthought. I'm not even sure if you're being sarcastic. My apologies if your humor went over my head before writing the following. I mean, it's just so funny. He can't even imagine that he made a mistake. And it's the very subject he says was a huge flaw in the first experiment and accounted for the big difference. Oh, amazing crap. I thought it was obvious that one of the objects is twice the mass. Yes, that part's obvious. The part, I would say even to mindless marbles, you're saying, why are you questioning why he did it? He did it because he thought he was creating something of twice the mass. But the fact is he wasn't doing it so they were the same mass in the same locations, which is a problem. Then without obtaining materials which just happen to be exactly 2-to-1 ratio in density. So I don't know exactly what he means. Like the clay is the same weight as the metal, and therefore he filled it with this clay or whatever he filled it with, which strikes me as more challenging and expensive than the experiment warrants. So again, you could just cut bigger and smaller objects, frankly, but whatever. Then it's either got to be a different shape or contain more material with identical shapes. Yes, different shape isn't going to be a big issue because air resistance isn't a big issue. Now the question is if you're forcing them to rotate, is there more ground friction? If you change the size. To me it wouldn't matter, right? Because twice the weight should have twice the surface coverage. That would even be a better circumstance in a way. It's more identical to just taking two objects, and saying that they're, 5 mass equals a 10 mass. So that wouldn't be a problem, frankly. I don't see how that's more expensive. Just cutting something in half isn't very expensive. If one of the copper tubes wasn't infilled with lead of the exact same mass, so that's funny, then it would obviously have the same mass as the other, and it would be a different experiment. Yes, but obviously if you understand anything about this whole spinning problem, it depends on where the mass is located. And if you locate the mass closer to the center of the mass, it rotates with a lot less momentum. Okay, if it would put anyone's mind at ease, then I can ask someone to repeat the exact same experiment with identical field flux tubes that the brand name commercially available. Why would they worry about finding a tube? Why would they worry about finding a substance to just make a piece that's twice as big as the other piece? Commercially available, so no one has any excuses for not repeating the experiment. I mean, obviously it needs to be repeated and done well, but again, your argument is you did it to contrive the results. The fact is you tried different things, and whenever it didn't come out your way, then you fix it. Whenever it does come out your way, you leave it alone. I mean, you're just forcing the experiment to match your theory. Okay, and they can predict both Gary's and mainstream physics outcome under those circumstances. Yeah, so I mean, it's a simple proposition. I mean, it's basically a proof that there is no compatibility between these two theories. You can't believe in momentum and believe in kinetic energy. These simple experiments prove it's one or the other. Has to be the controlling mechanism. One of them is real and one of them is fake. Okay, and my argument is if they do these experiments well, you'll always find out momentum is conserved and momentum is the real thing, and kinetic energy is, as stated, a fable. It's completely has no relevance to reality, and the only things that demonstrate it are illusions. 4 times the height and gravity. All right, you fall 4 times the distance, and you only have twice the velocity, which is really telling you, yeah, it's twice the weight. And it's more importantly only twice the amount of time that you're actually in the gravity. It's a 9.8 meters per 1 second force. Every 1 second you get 9.8 meters. If you're only in the force 2 seconds, how can you have 4 seconds worth of energy? The fact is you don't, and all the evidence points to that. Your velocity is only doubled. But I'll bet a gold pig it wouldn't make a half path of difference, because Gary is fundamentally wrong about the 2-to-1 relationship. Okay, so all the evidence, really, physical evidence in the universe right now, points to that 2-to-1 thing. Nobody thinks it takes 4 times the fuel to go twice as fast. Nobody thinks going twice as fast on the highway is using 4 times the fuel. Nobody believes this shit. Okay, so, you know, where's the evidence of it? I mean, twice the velocity, twice the weight. How could twice the weight be 4 times the energy? Right there, the statement doesn't make any sense. Twice the weight is 4 times the energy? Come on. It's a ridiculous starting point. Would be maintained whether the objects are launched singly or simultaneously. Well, I mean, obviously when you launch them both with the same force. Now, that's something I haven't calculated out, though. You know, we have certain amounts of data, so you should be able to make a consistency between when you have both of them on there, the speed should be, you know, substantially halved in terms of velocities. The average velocity of both objects combined should be half of what it is when you only have one of the objects on. Whether you put the 5 mass further out or you put the 10 mass closer to the fulcrum, those numbers should equal the amount of force in the first experiment. It shouldn't change how much energy you get out of the spring, what weight you put on top of the spring. What weight you put on top of it shouldn't change how much momentum you get out of the spring. So again, this is all arguments about, they think momentum isn't captured in a spring. You're not capturing its momentum. You're capturing some kind of kinetic energy thingy. Which again doesn't make any intuitive sense, because then guns couldn't work and all the other, you know, if I use a spring gun, I couldn't conserve the momentum. You can't do both. You can't conserve kinetic energy and conserve momentum if you're converting converting mass into different, converting energy into different masses. I could understand people's objection more easily if phase 1 of the experiment hadn't agreed with both Gary and mainstream's physics, with both Gary and mainstream's physics 2-to-1 prediction. So he's conceding that mainstream predicts 2-to-1 with only about a 1.6% error, if I recall correctly. All right. That in effect validates the worthiness of the experiment, because if different moments of inertia were affecting the outcome, then how come the outcome isn't noticeably affected? Because it was a small amount of difference that you made into a gigantic amount of difference. It would have been seen in the experiment if the lighter object had rotated, and if it had rotated, it would have been at the disadvantage. Again, it would have been slowing it down more than it slowed down the other object, because more of the mass technically was at a higher, further from the center of gravity, and therefore collected a higher percentage of the momentum. All right. Is it just a coincidence yet again that the 4.1 figure comes out being on? It's not a coincidence. You basically say it right in your video, right in your comment here, that you keep constructing the experiments and publishing the ones that come out your way. And all the ones that don't come out your way, you figure there has to be a problem, and you fix it, so to speak. You fix it by breaking it, because you don't like that it's coming out the wrong way. So you have to break it in some way to make it not come out the right way. Same with Gary's. Will prove things once and for all proposed experiment nobody could be bothered doing. Yes, all of these experiments no one can be bothered doing. Okay, physics couldn't be bothered proving it takes 4 times the fuel to go twice as fast in 350 years. They couldn't be bothered proving that this is a fact, even though it doesn't seem like it could possibly be a fact. No one's noticed it. Anyway, I had to suffer yet more silly excuses, such as the pennies effectively being frisbees. It's not an invalid point to point out that frisbees have a behavior that's very different than just throwing wiffle balls or some other mass of the same mass. I could throw the same mass in the form of a disc, or I could throw the same mass in the form of a ball. Do I really think they're going to behave the same way? That clearly it changes how they are affected by air resistance. It would be stupid not to notice that as a variable. Supposedly slowing them down such a massive amount, they fell about 30% short of Gary's prediction. So let's understand, this is the experiment for which Brozo has no theoretical ground at all. Okay, so again, let's go over it, just because it's hilarious that they can't even get where their experiment can only prove they suck at doing experiments, because there's no possible way to fuck this one up. You just can't fuck it up. I mean, there's no, there's no grounds, there's no room for their answer. Okay, so this is the experiment where you're using an energy to launch an object, okay, with a velocity in this direction, and you have no friction, and you just let the objects be pushed down by gravity. So you're using a force to push an object, and it's got two motions. It's got this direction and it's got this direction. Now all of physics knows these two are separate motions. This motion isn't affected at all by this motion, this motion. These two are not connected at all. And so all this object is really doing is finding a place to hit the ground. The velocity is almost unchanged, okay, because it's only air resistance, so it has a pretty free ride. And all you're really doing is changing the endpoint, the point where it will crash, by changing the velocity. All you're doing is changing how much this time will be the same. This drop straight down will be the same time as this drop, will be the same time as this drop, will be the same time as this drop, will be the same time as this drop. You're not extracting any energy from this object. So this will all be 1 second for it to do this, 1 second to do this, 1, 1, 1, 1. And all you're doing is, by changing the velocity, okay, you're creating this more distance in the same amount of time. Okay, it's more distance in the same amount of time. Time. This is all the same amount of time you have, and obviously you go more distance, but you're not pulling any energy out here. You're not collecting the energy. You're not slowing it down. So when you're rolling something down a surface, you're obviously using friction to extract all of its energy, and it will stop because you've taken all the energy out of it. Here, you're not taking the energy out. It still hits the ground going this way. Now, it will hit the ground also this way. And obviously, the more speed you give it, the more you could hurt the ground, because some of the energy will be combined when it hits the ground. Some of the stopping energy this way and the stopping energy this way will combine. Okay, and so you will slow it down. You'll start extracting a lot of its velocity. But that's when you start collecting it as work. You start doing work. Here you're doing work on the ground. You're pulling the energy out each sequence. So the argument is this experiment should never come out any other way, okay, than what the velocity is. So if you actually make the object go twice the velocity and it has 1/2 the mass, okay, if you actually did that experiment, it can't come out theoretically, if you did the experiment correctly, it can't come out theoretically any other way than the faster thing hits here, twice the distance. It can't come out any other way. It doesn't matter, because they're going to fall at the same rate. The time is going to be exactly the same, the time of travel, the time they have to travel. In twice the time, this one has to go twice as far, you would argue, and in 1 unit of time, obviously at twice the velocity, it covers twice the distance. Twice the velocity is twice the distance. So it has to come out this way. It can't come out any other way. So he's sitting here trying to pretend, no, I made it come out this way. I made it come out some other way that validates this 1.4 thing. It can't possibly validate it because you're not extracting the energy. You're not measuring anything. You're just basically saying, if I was in space and I threw something twice as fast as something else, how much distance does the twice as fast thing cover in the same time? Well, it's twice the distance, quite obviously. So this is essentially duplicating because you eliminated the friction. You're just basically saying how far does something going twice as fast travel in any unit of time? Well, of course it travels twice as far if it's going twice the velocity. Of course it does. Can't do anything else. So here's an argument. There's no point in flicking things off of cliffs, okay? Because the rules of that experiment are that things that are twice as fast have to land twice as far away. They have to, because the thing pushing them down is pushing them down at the same rate. Too stupid, really. But do these assholes concede anything? No. Do they concede, oh yeah, we probably shouldn't be doing those experiments? No. Yeah. Let's see. Okay. All right. Is it just a coincidence yet again? The 1.4 figure comes along, bang on. Yeah, and whatever. Same with Gary's we'll prove things once and for all. Proposed experiment nobody could be bothered doing, not even him. So again, I don't want to do experiments. I don't think I have the facilities to do them well enough. It doesn't seem like it's my job, frankly. And so I don't. I mean, if I had a high-speed camera and I had this and I had all this stuff, well, then it'd be fun to do the experiment because you can really cover everything. But it's not much fun if you can't make sure you're doing it right. Where these incarnations of the experiment just keep inching closer and closer to the predicted 1.4, and they don't, but whatever. I mean, obviously when he did the pool ball experiment, he didn't realize he was proving my point. Okay, so and it didn't just inch my way, it was a gigantic leap. And then when he did the experiment where he claimed it was validation of his theory because he didn't realize that his number is 12, and 1.4 of 12 is 16, not 14. He didn't even understand that simple mathematical mistake. And so he thought it was a great success when, no, actually he proved that he can't do the experiment right because he was just as far from his answer as he was from my answer. Both predictions were equal distant from his actual experimental results, which is pretty much saying I suck at doing experiments. Well, I mean, I had to suffer yet more silly excuses. So he just keeps claiming that everything's silly. So talking about consistent launching devices, and quick release, these are interesting subjects, right? Because consistent isn't the same as quick. And what's the whole point of the quick is to be even. That is, don't allow there to be a differential. So you're trying to do two things. You're trying to release energy from something that has twice the pressure, for example, a water hose or something. You can sort of understand that, yeah, at twice the pressure, it's a lot harder to make sure I didn't lose stuff going all kinds of different directions and screw it up. So it's sort of an important subject. And again, he calls it excuses. So, it's just, I mean, look, to exaggerate the point, Professor Lewin went to the other extreme of using a blowtorch, a propane torch, to break a string to ensure a quick release. I mean, but he doesn't, he just calls these silly excuses. Worrying about the variables is just silly excuses in his mind, because variables are just to be fucked with to force the experiment to look the way you want it to. That's all he thinks. That's how he thinks. He thinks it doesn't matter what shape an object is when you drop it into something. So it doesn't matter that the arrow is pointy or the arrow is dull. It goes just as far regardless. such as the pennies effectively being frisbees. So yeah, so I brought that up. Supposedly slowing them down with such a massive amount they fell 30% short of Gary's prediction. So again, let's just understand. Gary's prediction is a scientific fact you can't undo unless you fuck up. The air resistance isn't enough to take energy from the objects. And so all you have is basically a clean physics experiment where if something's going twice as fast, it has to go twice as far, or it's not going twice as fast. It's that simple. If you actually gave the objects twice the velocity, they have to go twice as far. There's no wiggle room. Apparently, when he said any object, I was supposed to be psychic and know he meant not flat objects or spheres. Yeah, I mean, I think anyone logically would know I didn't mean feathers. I didn't mean you shoot feathers and see how much the air affects them. Obviously, any object just meant any object that isn't going to be completely changed in its motion through air. So, yeah, that was I made the assumption you were clever enough to figure out that when I said any object, I didn't literally mean feathers. I did it again with spheres. Much the same outcome, about 2.9 instead of 1.4. So here he's saying it's even worse. So using round objects, the answer came out even more insipidly silly. Where somehow these things didn't fly. Twice the velocity didn't go twice the distance. It only went 0.29 extra. So it was short 70% of the, more velocity it should have, more distance it should go, that somehow it was impeded by this gigantic amount. The only thing which finally got it to exactly 1.4 was nothing at all to do with the objects, but me simply ensuring they were launched off a rock-solid foundation. So again, his launcher was shit. I pointed out how it was shit. And he did all kinds of arguments about how my solder sucker is perfect and blah, blah, blah. So it's just such bullshit. He doesn't, obviously this is the exactly wrong guy to be doing these experiments. Because he just couldn't care less about any of these details or these subjects. Angular momentum, who fucking cares? Wind resistance, who fucking cared? I mean, just couldn't care less. I mounted the launch surface so it was pressed against a brick wall and could not recoil very much at all. Well, it shouldn't recoil at all. So yeah, that's really pretty much really important. But anyway, I tell a lie. There was one more factor. I reduced the mass of the moving parts of the launch device. So let's also understand a big problem with the launch device is that it was a hitting device. So the spring pushed a plunger. The plunger bangs into the object. And so obviously now you're getting into Newton's cradle problems where the plunger's mass is now hitting something of a different mass. And if you try to hit something of a different mass, hitting it, you're not going to get the energy in. It's going to reflect a portion of it. So clearly, these aren't even complex variables. You can understand that you want to have the object be pushed by the spring, not hit by the spring. That hitting and pushing are two different things. Hitting is with a mass hitting another object. Okay, and the crash indicates that you're going to end up with reflections. So you don't want the spring to be hitting the object. You want it to be in constant contact with the spring, and you want it to be pushed by the spring, not smacked by the spring. I mean, this, again, like I said, this is not a very complex variable to be aware of, that there is a difference between hitting and pushing. So there's a difference between really good contact and really bad contact. Just in rolling, there's a difference between skidding and rolling. Okay, so they were not adding to the mass being launched by the spring, and then I did away with the launch device altogether and opted for Gary's elastic band idea, which again has its own limitations in the sense that you learn that elastic bands don't recover quite as quickly as everybody thinks they do, that they stretch and it takes a while for them to regain their original elasticity. So you're best to give the experiment a little time before you do it a second time. Anyway, I even thanked him for the idea that the low mass of the elastic band made the last bit of difference. Well, obviously also it made it really easy to have the elastic in contact, in very good contact with the object you're pushing. So that's why I used an elastic band. But I didn't thank him for moving the goalpost when he didn't like the outcome proving him wrong. So again, he calls it moving the goalpost when I talked about how the fact is that when I did it with my fingers releasing, I didn't get good results. And so I had to figure out how to do the release thing quicker, because I was realizing that I can't release the object quickly enough, and therefore I'm putting friction on the pulling that the fast object is doing. When the fast object is trying to leave, because I'm not releasing it quickly enough, I'm dragging and pulling energy out. Alright, and it was just a coincidence when the 2-to-1 ratio carts launched by the same spring also kept coming out 1.4 exactly. The carts are another crap experiment. Gary's complaint back then, my complaint was you're releasing the carts by hand and using two different hands, which is even more, frankly, why should I even be bothered paying much attention? I mean, any kind of flaw can be created by that. I mean, that's a really flawed release mechanism. So there was lots of complaints. I complained about the fact that your carts, the way they were designed, is half the mass of the carts is in the wheels. Which is also a problem. Gary's complaint back then is the number of people was the silly assertion that it made a difference whether the launch spring was fixed to a wall or it was pushing off, or whether it was attached to the cart itself. Well, to say there's no difference, I think would be silly. Clearly, how well it's attached is part of the subject, and how well the energy gets into the object. How much energy is left over in the spring? Did the spring fully stay in contact with the cart through the whole motion? All of those are important considerations. So I did it both ways. You can guess the outcome. So he jokes, mainstream physics turned out to be wrong and Gary was right. So again, I'm defending mainstream physics. Let's understand, they believe in conservation of momentum. So I think, again, if we surveyed most physicists and you said do levers and springs and hydraulics and what's the other one, gears, do they conserve momentum? I think they're all going to say yes, especially things like gears. Do you really think gears don't conserve momentum? All right. The half-mass cart literally went twice as fast. Now that was sarcasm. So, I mean, the sarcasm is absolutely useless in the context of you clearly do shitty experiments and get shitty outcomes and then claim victory. So again, he claimed victory when he got an outcome exactly in between the two predictions. He claimed that proved his theory. If I give you all the relevant dimensions of the tube's outer and inner diameter length, you already know the mass of the copper and the lead insert, obviously, then you ought to be able to calculate the precise amount of difference it will have made in the experiment, which you say. Yes, well, the precise is that the average for the two things, the average atom, in one case, in the light object, the average atom has to move with twice the momentum in spin. It has twice the spin momentum as the other object. It's a problem. So Brozo is going to say, and can you tell us all what outcome I would have got had it been exact in every way except for being made of a material of exactly twice the density of the other? Yeah, well, whatever the amount of angular momentum is stored in the object is spin. So I don't know how much percentage of anything's rotation, how much of a percentage it is, but it could be 10, could be 15. It could be a significant percentage of the energy is in the spin. So the same shape could have twice the mass exactly. Well, again, the shape of the object isn't the real issue here. We're not really, nobody's arguing because, that shape, besides round, nobody's arguing that this rolling, or I cut this in half and I roll it, that those two things have a problem. That would be okay because it's a minor amount of air resistance. The size difference won't be enough air resistance to mean anything. All right. It seems to be, let's see, where were we? Let's see, same. Instead of me doubling the mass with the exact mass of lead pressed in it, it's precisely filled the entire length to achieve double the mass. Okay, so can you tell me the exact outcome? Yeah. So the same shape could have twice the mass exactly. Well, like I said, you just cut something. Cut a steel bar. Doesn't matter. Cut anything with the same density, spread, even density, of the same rotational size, diameter, and that should work. That's what your quarters were, when you rolled your pennies or whatever you call them. Frankly, they had the same rotational diameter. It is such a problem, then you must have a pretty good idea how much of a problem. Well, how come you didn't have to calculate that for the first experiment? So the cue balls, you're saying it's a problem, you're saying it's a big problem, and you didn't calculate anything. I don't profess to know that. All I know is both phases of the experiment came out virtually exactly correct. So I don't know what phases are, right? So that's the tricky part. So it seems odd, to say the least, that the problem you highlight could only have manifest in us getting the wrong result if we corrected for that problem. The one case you can't get the wrong result because in fact you put more momentum into the lighter object at the different location just because of the fact that the lever forces there to be a twice the velocity. It forces it to happen. And the fact is that the hollow object you made actually has more momentum per proportion of the two. It's actually moving with more momentum because more of its mass is on the outside than the inside. The spin portion of the momentum is real, and you can't change the linear motion, so it has to collect more force. So you actually collected more force in the lighter object from the initial lever because now you have that extra amount of momentum in the spin. I don't know anyone, not even Gary, who claims the first phase of the experiment should have come out differently. So again, I'm explaining to you. See, you just don't really want to think about the physics. I'm just saying, so when you're doing the experiment with the 5 mass and the 10 mass both on the lever, you can sort of understand that when you push the lever, this has to go twice as fast. It doesn't have a choice. These two can't go different speeds. It's impossible for them to go a different speed. This one has to go twice as fast. It doesn't matter if I made this a 10 mass and a 10 mass. This one would still be going twice the speed. And the catch would be is most of the momentum from the spring would have gone into this object rather than this object. This one would have twice the momentum. It would leave at twice the velocity and have twice the mass. This other one would only leave at half the velocity. If I did it the other way around, put the 5 mass here and I put the 10 mass on the outside, the 10 mass is still going to go twice as fast as the 5 mass now. It's going to have 4 times the energy, but yes, it's going to be twice the mass and twice the velocity. So 4 times as much momentum will be in the outside object. So that's why you didn't see the difference, is because you're not seeing the energy and the angular momentum. All you're seeing is the momentum in the direction. You're not seeing the spin energy. But if you could see it, then you'd realize, oh, I get it. When I did it with both objects on the stick, I was forcing more energy into the lighter object, the outside object. I was forcing it to take more of the force. Well, okay. So I'm not really sure what you and Mindless and Gary are all complaining about. I don't know if I'm complaining. I'm just pointing it out and saying, why should I pay any attention to this? You took a problem and made it even worse. A variable that was not perfect, and now you made the experiment even more imperfect. Obviously, the problem you highlight isn't such a problem after all. So he says that's obvious, when no, it's obvious that you don't care about these variables. You don't care about any influences that distort the results. You don't care that pointy objects go into objects easier than non-pointed objects. You don't care that that's a fact. I thought it was obvious that if one object was twice the mass, then without obtaining materials which just happen to be exactly, didn't I read this? Which strikes me as a challenging and expensive. Didn't we already read that? Huh, that's funny. I don't know. Let's see. Expensive, the experiment warrants, then it's either got to be a different shape or, yes, we already know that. Do you follow? Yeah. If one of the copper tubes wasn't filled with lead, so we did that. I don't know what happened here. All right, just kidding. Oh, okay, so yeah, we already did that. All right. So I don't know what happened there. All right. So let's see what this Merker guy said. It's also kind of insane to think he will actually pay anyone $4,000 for them to offer counter evidence. No, I'm offering them to offer an explanation, just to validate the point that this is a real subject, frankly, momentum versus KE. It wasn't resolved with some semantics argument. It's not about semantics. There's a huge physical difference in a universe run by momentum and a universe run by kinetic energy. And the fact that they have completely evaded this subject and pretended these two concepts are somehow coexisting. One of them has to be a factual fable, and the other one has to be the real thing. There really isn't any choice that you can believe in both, because you can't conserve both. It's only to get more exposure for his channel theories. Well, obviously that's part of it. Yes, I'm soliciting an audience of scientists, people who are responsible for all these lies and crap that they're spewing and perverting poor ignorant slobs like you. I want that audience, and I want to show them to be cowards and weak. I want to show that they have no evidence, they have no good arguments. I want to show you just how bad their physics is and how bad their understanding of their own physics is. They are, in fact, idiots on the subjects. No, they're not idiots with math and this and that, but they're idiots on the conceptual subject of the difference between, say, MGH and MGT. That subject, they're idiots. If you have a better chance betting $100 on numbers 13 in roulette. Yeah, well, we'll see, okay, you little fucker. And you're going to be on the ash heap of shit talker, in my opinion. Because I'll win the fight, and all I'm doing is trying to solicit the fight. You can't see that's all I'm attempting to do, is try to get somebody to show up. I'm Mike Tyson, frankly, and I'm saying, come on, show up. And I'll beat the shit out of you. Okay, Mike Tyson passed. Obviously, Mike Tyson biting people's ears off was kind of bullshit. But anyway, the whole thing is just, I'm just saying, I'm clearly not afraid of the argument, and I want the argument to happen. I want the scientists to unravel their lies. And I'm going to show them their lies, like the Young double slit experiment that creates a single slit pattern. I want to show them that lie and say, why are you selling this lie? That Young did a double slit pattern, that he analyzed a double slit pattern when he clearly analyzed a single slit pattern. Why are you selling a lie? And you don't want that to happen for some reason, you little piece of shit. Yeah. All right. So anyway. All right. So I guess it's on to the Ian Gosling. So look, bravo, somebody, White Henry. I don't really love that screen name. Actually did bring up the point, mindless marbles, in kind of a bullshit manner, shows up to say me too, when he didn't say anything beforehand, about his concern, his notice of something really quite glaring. I mean, it wasn't hard to figure out. You look at the two objects, they're obviously the same size, and you're saying, well, how can one of them be weighing twice as much? And so as soon as you ask that question, you say, oh, fuck, one of them's got to be hollow. And then you can see that one of them's hollow. All right. So, so now we'll do the Gosling guy. So this is only a 2-minute video, so it's not going to take up much time. You should be able to see this. All right, so we're back on levers, and it's already been acknowledged by me that, I didn't know this about balances, but there's a trick, okay? And figuring out that trick is the tricky part of the trick, right? Is the, exactly what causes the effect. So again, we have variables, all right? Now, I did point out that, it does seem that classically, okay, they do balances by either, okay, there's two forms of a balance, the primitive medieval kind of balance. They have a fulcrum, okay, and the weights are hung below, all right, or they can have a more complex mechanism where there's two plates, and then through leverage, okay, the two plates basically are on the lever, and so the weights are above the lever. Now this, okay, then this would be a fulcrum again. So obviously the fulcrum is the tricky piece. That's one of the tricks, right? So there is a difference between what you would say a bearing here, okay, and then making a lever by having a little notch, okay, and then having that sit inside of a little pointy thing so it can't go anywhere. And that these two would be different. Now, I wouldn't expect there to be any difference. Like, why should this make any difference? But clearly this one does rotate the material, and this one does too. So the mass of the lever itself obviously will change as I tilt it. Okay, then the fulcrum is making this line through the lever. I didn't do that vertical very well, but you can see what I'm saying. So when it's this way, right, there's the same amount of lever on both sides. But when it's this way, you can see there's more lever here and less lever here. So more mass of the lever. So you clearly could indicate, you could say to yourself that, oh, this one stays down here because it is actually heavier. This one is heavier because there's more lever on that side of the fulcrum than there is on that side of the fulcrum. So anyway, so there's two things to consider. And I haven't figured out, frankly. We don't have enough experimental evidence yet, I guess, to figure it out. There's how you establish the fulcrum, that is whether you hang it, okay, if I suspend it from a string, okay, on a loop, then all the mass, the fulcrum is down here, okay. So I have made the fulcrum a point at the bottom. And the other issue is hanging the masses. So he's hanging the masses from a mechanism. He put nail through and then hung a loop over the nail. So he went to a lot of trouble. And he has avoided just doing the simple thing where you just tie a string around and hang the masses. So he's hanging again from the center of the lever's mass. Where in these other examples, you're basically just attaching it and hanging it below. So below would be, if I looped a string over it, you can understand the weight is on the top surface. So the weight is on this top surface. It's not going through the center. It's hitting the top. And here, it's sort of the same thing, right? Because I have to tie it. So unless I do some attachment thing where I'm attached right to the bottom, it's hard to do that. Now, I did it with magnets. So the magnet is here attached to the bottom, and then the weight hangs. And the weight can move freely-ish. Okay, it doesn't move much because the magnets are fairly strong, but it does move. So which one has more effect? Where the fulcrum is, whether the fulcrum is centered, a bearing versus a a standard, a traditional fulcrum, which is just a tiny little triangle in a notch thing, triangle in a triangle. So depending on what kind of fulcrum you use or how you hang the masses, you will get this effect where I could put the lever in a position. Okay, it was balanced, and I could move it to different positions, and it will not restore itself to balance. It won't go back to being neutral. It'll stay in this position. Now, as I just pointed out, if your fulcrum is in the bottom, then that will happen because you're changing how much mass, you're changing the weight of the object. So the center line is making this heavier than this side, and so that would make sense that it's just showing you how much it weighs. And if I tilt it up this way, then I'm doing the opposite. I'm making this one lighter and this one heavier, and so it stays in that position because frankly one side is heavier than the other side. So anyway, so he didn't say he was going to draw this, but he said he has to draw it to explain it. So and he says it has something to do with torque. Whatever. Obviously, the whole subject is about the weight of objects. Yeah, so this wasn't anything I disputed. I just was not aware that it really makes a difference whether your masses or your fulcrum. I can't say which one's more important, whether the fulcrum being in the center or whether it's the masses being able to move. And always create a straight line for their mass. Their mass is always hanging, creating the same weight. And this was brought up because I did point out in his previous video that he had attached the masses to the lever, therefore forcing them, to change their position as it rotates, which isn't ideal.
Balance with wobbly bits on it. These weights now hung from hooks and the hook.
So we're to believe that he hasn't tried just tying a string and hanging it over the side of the lever. So he hasn't tried just hanging, like just take a piece of string and just hang the piece. And if you want to tape it so it doesn't move, you could put a little piece of tape on it. But you could just tie a string around with another loop, and the other loop has the weight hanging on it. I mean, it's so simple. And he's gone to the trouble of drilling a precise hole through the center, sticking a nail in it, then sticking another piece of metal as a hanger on top of that rod. So he's hanging a hanger on a rod, so it can rotate this way. Seems really complicated, and we're to believe he hasn't tried the just hang it from a string thing yet.
He's hanging on a nail that goes right through the center of this tube. So it's free to swing, and the same on that end. And the prediction is that this lever...
So somebody's predicting something. Frankly, I don't know who's predicting, but whatever. Who's predicted anything?
When displaced, won't oscillate. I'll try and get back far enough.
So he says it won't oscillate. And why would I predict that? That wouldn't be my prediction, frankly.
Let's see.
So he does have to do a little to force it not to move and to stay in that position, get quiet. So he's not really pushing it up and then seeing what happens. But regardless, it clearly will not behave this way if, like my lever, one right over there that I videotaped a year ago. It perfectly oscillates. I mean, you can move it in a position, it oscillates no problem. So clearly there's some little factor here. My weights aren't going right through the center of the lever. The pressure isn't being pushed on the center of the lever. So that's a difference because mine are hanging from the bottom of the lever. So therefore, they're putting the stress is moving in some sort of not linear straight line. Now, maybe that has something to do with it. Maybe my hole in the center isn't perfectly in the right place, and when I'm hanging the lever from a thread, that's not right. But maybe it's just less friction. I mean, obviously mine has very little friction because it's a little tiny wire that all the friction has to happen on. It doesn't have enough turning radius. And the more turning radius you have, the more you screw it up.
It should stay in that position.
I mean, maybe if this piston he has it on, this axle, was the same diameter as this nail, maybe it would be more likely to move. Who knows?
Or alternatively, in that position.
Right, so you can sort of see that if I drew a straight line up and down, you end up with more lever on this side than you do that side. So that's why it's staying down, is because this side is actually heavier, and this is now what balance looks like, because this side of the lever actually is more plastic on this side of the fulcrum than that side. But that doesn't explain, that same fact would be a fact if I had a fulcrum down here. So, and it oscillates. It'll go back to a real balance. So it probably has something to do with this turning radius. That would be my guess.
It does. And it's not the friction on the bearing. It's very, very sensitive and very free.
So it went up and it came back a little, but it stops here, which is basically saying that's balanced. See, there's this big hunk of extra lever. There's extra lever down here, right? The straight line is saying, see, I'm going to cut more off one side than I am cutting off the other side, based on the diameter of this radius. And the smaller that radius is, the less I'll be uneven in how much I'm cutting. Something like that.
To arrest quite quickly. Not friction. To explain what?
Well, friction is a real thing, so you can just say you've eliminated all friction, but I'm not sure you have. It's a tiny amount of energy when it's oscillating. It's not a lot of energy, it's a small amount of energy.
Right, it's doing that. I'll have to draw a picture, because it's all to do with the forces.
Yeah, we've already figured that part out. But anyway, so the interesting part is to figure out whether it's the fulcrum or whether it's how you're hanging the weights. That would be a nice way to separate the question. What's causing the effect? The dangling weights or the centered fulcrum?
On that lever.
I mean, can you do it by balancing the lever on top of this cylinder, right? If you just took this off and put a plastic thing on top of the cylinder, and let's see if you could do something. You could just tape it, or you could find some other way to connect it. Do you have the same? Look, he has this other lever where he glued it to a ball bearing, or, well, zip tied it to a ball bearing. Do that fulcrum again and see if that fulcrum has the same freezing ability. If you can freeze the lever in these different positions.
Balance. And it's a bit complicated.
Right, and it really doesn't have anything to do with what we're arguing about. So it's an interesting detail. I mean, it's a fact I didn't know that levers were this sensitive to where the weight's hanging. You know, whether it's in line with the center of the lever's mass or not. It matters, apparently. I wouldn't have, it didn't occur to me, okay? So it's an interesting factoid, but it has absolutely nothing to do with this 2-to-1 argument, okay? And it doesn't have anything to do with whether levers conserve momentum. You're saying levers don't conserve momentum, which I'm going to argue is just absolutely crazy. But whatever, keep doing it, and I'll eventually show you're crazy.
Do it without a nice picture. But I thought I wanted to prove that because it was debated that it would still oscillate even though the weights are hanging free. It doesn't. And you can explain that. I'll have to draw a picture to explain why.
Yes, you'll have to draw a picture. So do that. Explain why. That would be very nice. I've been asking for 2 years for somebody to explain how a lever works. And then you could explain how it doesn't conserve momentum. So you could explain how you can have a certain momentum go in on one side and you won't get the same momentum out of the other side.
It's to do with the torques on, or the moments, as it's called, on that lever. Or that balance system, or whatever you want to call it. Yeah. Alright, see you in the next one.
Alright, yeah, I'm waiting on it. So that was a day ago almost. So, I don't know why I just didn't get to that, but whatever. So we'll see if there's any new video, but probably not. Does not oscillate. So yeah, that's it. Okay. So I think we're done for the day and such. Yeah. Oh, I didn't have that video on. Damn it. There's nothing really to see here, so you didn't miss anything. But we will go back just so you can see.
This is a balance with wobbly bits on it.
And let's just put it in this different place, and then you can see
it
there. So it stays in that position, and as I pointed out, you can sort of see if you drew a straight line through the lever, you could see that there's actually physically more lever on one side than the other side. But it really just depends, on this center thing and the rules about how much actual lever you're changing. Yeah, I mean, it's so subtle, I just can't imagine that could be the effect. I think it has something to do with this radius, but who knows.
And it's not the friction on the bearing, it's very, very sensitive and very free.
So, I mean, I'm just saying that argument is, I don't think it's a useful argument to say it's not friction ever, because frankly, you have to overcome the friction to start the movement, because there is real friction. And friction's always, the starting friction is always a problem. The fact that there's more friction to start something moving when there is any friction. So there's just a picture of it frozen in that downward position.
Hanging free, it doesn't. And we can explain that. I'll have to draw a picture.
Okay, so whatever, you heard that part, so that's all you need. Again, this doesn't do anything to create any better viewing or seeing of the distinction between kinetic energy and momentum. This is a side subject now of some interest, but I'm just saying it's doesn't explain how you can not conserve momentum. Doesn't explain where the momentum you're losing is going. All right. So that's enough of a video. So till the next time. Oh, I should see if there's any comments. Damn it. Kind of reminds me of how tall towers sometimes prevent from going into oscillation due to wind by similar large weights suspended internally at the top. Yes, they're just dampening it, so they're creating an opposite oscillation to consume the other oscillator. So they're just trying to take the energy out of the storage system with the counter energy. Anyway, boats do it now. To prevent the boat from rocking as much, they just move weights inside the boat in the opposite directions to the surf and try to keep the boat more level. Anyway, so enough said and such, and so forth and whatnot. There aren't any comments here. Thanks, Ian. Nothing. Brozo's crap isn't worth reading when he's not saying anything. But anyway, so again, this is all their distraction. Okay, I make the simple claim how levers work, that they conserve momentum, that something weighing 10 pounds weighs 10 pounds. It can't weigh 11 pounds. It can't weigh 12 pounds. It has to weigh 10 pounds. You can't weigh more or less than what it weighs. I mean, frankly. And they're claiming, no, magical kinetic energy thing kicks in and somehow it only weighs 1.4 or some other kind of crap and blah blah blah, bullshit. So anyway, till the next time and such and so forth and whatnot.